Right. So thank you so much, Amrita, for joining and welcome to my little talk show. I don't know if I can call it a talk show, but a little conversation. And I'm really, really glad that you agreed to do this. And the topic that we've chosen for today, I think it's going to be very interesting for me as well because I'm looking forward to learn a lot. And I feel that this is an area where you might feel that you know a lot, but at the same time, I feel that I'm not very, knowledgeable over here. So I'm really looking forward to that. But can we start by introducing you a little bit, just for the audience to know what you're working on and what you're doing these days?
Of course. Hi. Thank you for having me here. I'm happy to talk. And a little bit about me. I've just completed a master's in neuropsychiatry, and I'm doing more research in epilepsy, but I have interest in neurodevelopmental disorders. So autism, ADHD, those are my areas of interest, which is why I think this topic is quite interesting in the context of the Indian education system as well. So, yeah, uh, and that's pretty much about me at the
Yeah.
moment.
Thank you so much. And I think that it's also a very interesting topic because we both belong to the same school and we have so much common experience in the field of education system. At least I can say that, we've definitely had common experiences coming from the same institution. So, just to start the discussion, I want to ask a very basic question, which is that, what exactly is neurodivergent behavior? Because, we might know it in a layman term and knowledge that, like this behavior might be termed as this, but with the terminology coming into the picture, it sort of makes it sound as something very, big, very difficult to understand, or something which is like very scientific. Because the moment the term neuro comes in, that you're like, अच्छा ये कुछ scientific term आ गया, कुछ medical term आ गया, and suddenly you feel very like, okay, this is beyond my understanding. So just for the clarity of maybe people like me a little bit who do not have so much
Ah,
understanding of what this term is, can you just explain a little bit what is neurodivergent behavior?
of course. So, neurodivergence is actually a pretty new word, I would say, because uh, earlier we used to have a lot of different terms which are not so pleasant to hear, but things like special child,
Hmm.
things like mentally retarded, which are not terms to be used, but they were earlier in use, are all of those terms combined together. And neurodivergence essentially means someone whose brain doesn't work in a typical way. Now, what we mean
Okay.
by typical is basically every person usually has similar social attendance to social cues, similar ways of behaving when given a particular situation. Like
Yeah.
if you hear a lot of noise, you close your ears. If you see a dog barking at you, you'd probably be afraid. So those kind of typical reactions, a lot of people who fall in that spectrum of neurodivergence wouldn't have similar behaviors to uh, the same situation. They wouldn't have similar process of processing their emotions. They wouldn't just that they don't work in the typical way that we consider is normal.
Normal.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
being normal is a very subjective thing as well, but that's a conversation for another day. But yeah,
Okay.
so basically, neurodivergence is essentially not being typical, having
Okay.
an atypical way of processing emotions, behaving.
Okay.
And people who who can be considered neurodivergent are mainly people with autism, with ADHD, those kind of neurodevelopmental disorders. Those people are considered neurodivergent.
Okay. So, I have studied psychology as an elective subject for about 5 years. And there was a semester where we studied about psychopathology, where, we really discussed in detail about neurodivergent behaviors, mental disorders, and the, various approaches to study it, to get to know about it. And, as someone obviously reading a lot and, consuming that kind of information, you are curious to test it also. Like, I would keep looking at people at that time and see that, "Acha, isme to kuch nahi hai." Like, is this person showing the kind of behavior that I'm reading about? Or, just trying to apply that knowledge on different people. But to, like, jokes aside, but when you talk about people who are, not typical, and as people who are a little well aware of these terms, you usually say that, don't use the term abnormal for them, or don't use the term that, you're different, or as you said that, you're retarded. But how do you recognize at the initial stage that, okay, this person is probably showing symptoms of a neurodivergent behavior? Because as you said that, their responses to probably a given stimulus will be very different from from a
Mhm.
normal person, from a regular person, let's say. But that might just be very situational also, that, only at that point of time uh, that person is behaving like that, but he or she might not necessarily be a neurodivergent person, like person who has those kind of differences in behavior. So how do you recognize, let's say for a child, the first person the child interacts with or is closer to are parents or the family members. So how does the family recognize these behaviors, or just the fact that, something might be different in their child?
Okay. I think there is a very exhaustive list of things that are needed to
Okay.
recognize what if there's something atypical. Let's stick to typical and atypical instead of normal. I think that's an easier way to describe things. So it's an exhaustive list, and if I went on and on about the diagnostics of the process of diagnosis, it's going to take hours because autism diagnosis and ADHD diagnosis have a lot of different variety of testings, which are subjective and objective to actually look at whether someone actually has autism or they fall on the spectrum or if they have ADHD. But I think some of the signs, early signs that parents can probably catch on, can be the child not hitting their developmental milestones, really important for autism, especially in terms of language acquisition, in terms of their behavior. They might not fit in socially in their schools when they go to preschool, or when they go into like a regular school. They might not fit in with their peers. They might not play with them as typical children would do. So those are some signs to watch out for when looking at autism. With respect to ADHD, I think there are many different signs that do indicate ADHD that parents or teachers can identify. Now, one of the signs is, of course, being really deficit on attention. So not being able to sustain attention at one point. So say that they're sitting in the classroom and the teacher's talking, and of course one lecture goes on for like 40 minutes, I think 30, 40 minutes depending on the school, and the kid is so frustrated and so fidgety because they can't sit down and they're not actually taking in any of that information. And because they're not able to take any of that information, they might not do well in exams, they might often fail, they might not be able to submit their homework on time, they might not be able to do the projects on time. So the academic performance goes really down because that environment is not conducive for them. So that's one of the signs that's really
Right.
important. Then another sign that I think is really important is when the parents receive a lot of complaints from school because they think that the child is misbehaving, he's talking back to the teachers, he is disrupting the class. And this is something that I spoke to my mom about because she's a teacher. And she was talking to me about this child who constantly blurts out in the classroom. So, in between what the teacher is saying, he'll constantly blurt out things and start speaking and disrupt the class. And the other teachers were really mad about it, and they would tell him that, you're really ill behaved, your parents haven't taught you well. And
Mm.
they went to the parents, they sent them a letter about it, which was quite sad. And my mom spoke to me extensively about the behavior that the child was displaying, and I it was very obvious that he had ADHD, but it wasn't diagnosed because uh, we don't think in that manner, we don't go in that direction at all.
Yeah.
And we just, yeah, so I think those signs are quite important, and
Mm.
that's one way to recognize if maybe something's wrong with their attention,
But
maybe there's some problem there.
like as someone who is also, in the field of teaching, um, and also because I also interact with a lot of teachers on a daily basis, a very obvious question over here that comes up is that, why is it like, important to term that behavior into a category? Because when you put, because mental health, even today, especially in a country like India, is sort of like a taboo. That, the moment you say that, okay, if I say that, I am depressed, or I am somebody who is going through anxiety, these are terms compared to our school days. Today, these are terms which have become very common in the sense that people know what they mean in a very loose fashion. They are also overusing the term depression. Like, even for a very small episode, people might say that, I was depressed for 2 days, which they might mean that, I was sad for 2 days. But we started using the term depression very loosely. But
Mhm.
when it comes to terms like mental disorder, ADHD, or somebody who has OCD. OCD again is something that we use so loosely today. But it's, when you read about it, it's also something which is very, very can be something very serious. But how do we make sure that, we don't use these terms very loosely on every child that is, sort of, you know, not behaving appropriately in the classroom, or, is, let's say the child is just naughty, he or she is just mischievous, likes to have fun, likes to tease other kids. Maybe he is not neurodivergent. That's just his personality, or that's just his nature. And or the other side, the flip side of it can be that, maybe the child has an environment at home which is disturbing him for that particular time. And if that environment can be resolved, the parents can be, involved in the process, that, this is what the child is behaving. If you can just focus a little bit on him or her, she will start behaving in a better way. So how do you differentiate that, before saying that, okay, this person is autistic or this person has learning disabilities or any other form of neurodivergent behavior. How do you analyze it very, very clearly and recognize that, okay, this is that behavior, this is not the child just being mischievous? How do you not use the term very casually?
I think that teachers anyway cannot label someone as having ADHD, but
Hmm.
one thing is that when you think about the child and you try to look at their behavior with their peers in the classroom, then you maybe speak to their parents about it, and you try and make that connection as to if the problem is only with them misbehaving in the class, or whether they're not performing well in the class as well. Is it multiple factors, or is it just one thing? So if they're just naughty, they would just misbehave, they wouldn't follow instructions. And there can be many reasons for that as well, but I think as a teacher, the responsibility is to question why that child is doing that. If they are
Hmm.
not doing
Hmm.
well, why are they not doing well?
Yeah.
If they are behaving badly with their peers, why are they doing that? So I think it all boils down to the why of the situation. So
Hmm.
I think it's the responsibility of the teachers to try and understand that why before trying to label them as the problem child, as the naughty kid, as a failure. Because I know from my experience in education that teachers are really harsh sometimes to tell kids, you're never going to achieve anything in life. You're never going to pass 10th. You're never going to pass 12th. And they never really try and make that attempt to understand why that kid is behaving or doing things in the way that he
Hmm.
is or
Hmm.
they are.
Hmm.
So I think it's exploring that why before jumping to a conclusion about it, and making sure that you have evidence from different places. So it's not just the evidence from the classroom that you've observed, but evidence from the children that are friends with that person,
Hmm.
with the parents, if there's a problem at home, if there's
Right.
something going on in the background. Because with the diagnosis of ADHD, they need the person needs to have a similar pattern of behavior in two or more environments. And the reason why that is a criteria in the diagnosis is because sometimes environments can trigger different behaviors.
Yeah.
So the sustaining pattern of behavior, no matter what the environment is the key point to a diagnosis of ADHD. And that is something that teachers need to keep in mind as well. And obviously, not self diagnose the kids, refer them to a counselor, refer them to a psychiatrist.
Hmm.
I think those are really important aspects. And I think teachers are really, really important. They have a really important part to play, really crucial to
Yeah.
understanding things, because a lot of times parents can come from various backgrounds. They can be not very well off, not very knowledgeable. They might not be observing their kids as much, especially when they grow up a little bit more, like they're in second,
Hmm.
third grade. So in at those times, teachers can be quite crucial in identifying problems and helping the kid have a
But
diagnosis.
another problem that arises over here, which I have heard from teachers as well, that, let's say you've identified that, okay, this child might have something that is going wrong. And as a person who is not a specialist, as you said, that, you cannot diagnose and correctly tell that what is the problem, but you've recognized this much that, this child needs to be referred to a counselor, or let's say to a therapist, not just a counselor. That, like, even schools have counselors these days, but they're just people who you can talk to. I don't think every school has a proper specialist or a, like a therapist who
Of
is
course.
really, someone who can diagnose. But
Yeah. No, and also, sorry to
yeah,
interrupt,
yeah, yeah,
but
please.
even with India and with the system that I know of, a proper diagnosis of ADHD and autism are actually not in place. There are no systems.
Okay.
There's a lot of times psychiatrists do a lot of testing, but there is a lack of proper standardized testing that's done in India, especially with respect to ADHD. And
Hmm.
so I think that's a lack that cannot be filled in anytime soon. But yeah, of course, as you said, counselors, they a lot of times they can't really do anything apart from actually just counseling and guiding the student. So
Yeah.
I think the correct pathway would be to refer to the counselor at school, and for them to be able to refer them to a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist uh, is really
Yeah.
important. One who's
Yeah.
actually a licensed clinical psychologist in India.
Well, my question, which was that,
Yeah.
let's say you recognized it, but to tell this to the parent, or, to inform parents about it, is a big task, because the immediate response is, आपसे बच्चा संभल नहीं रहा है इसलिए आप कुछ भी बोल रहे हो. The parents are like, our child doesn't behave like, it's a complete state of denial that our child doesn't behave like this at home. You are not able to handle him in the classroom. You are not able to, take care of him. And that's why you're just throwing the responsibility away by saying that my child is abnormal. That's the,
Mhm.
immediate response. And parents don't even, well educated people coming from, great backgrounds, lawyers, and, even professors, they're not ready to accept that feedback or, understand it. And that's when the challenge really begins for a teacher, because if parents are not, wanting to cooperate and agree upon it, the teacher basically is helpless. She cannot, or he cannot do anything. So, even to uh, inform a parent about their child, and the fact that this can be, let's say a child who has ADHD, I think by the time he is 7, 8 years old, it's very, the behavior pattern is very much visible. You can recognize it. And if you're able to, start the counseling sessions for that child, if you're able to modify uh, your behavior towards that child, I'm not saying modifying the child's behavior, but your behavior towards that child, it will be really helpful for the learning process, overall school period. It's not about changing the way the child is behaving. It's more about creating a more suitable environment for him or her in the house, in the school. But for that, acceptance is very important. That yes, something, there's something that we need to work on, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
somewhere I think that lack of acceptance is also creating a barrier for the kid.
I
And yeah.
agree. I think with parents, especially in India, because there is a lack of awareness and there is a lack of understanding of these things, it can be quite hard to have them actually take their child to a psychiatrist because they think a psychiatrist is someone negative. And while we can't really change that image on our own as a teacher or as an
Hmm.
individual who with the child, I think the only way we can help the situation is how we frame the uh, the information. So
Hmm.
if we tell them, I have recognized that this is something that he can work on, but it's also a sign of ADHD, and explain to them what ADHD is, explain to them or ask them to read about it a little bit, assure them that it's not something wrong, nothing, there's nothing wrong with it, there's nothing bad
Yeah.
about it. It's a different way of being and behaving. And
Hmm.
trying to assure them, trying to reassure them on those aspects. And also, as you said, it's it could help, it would really be helpful information for the teachers to modify the environment in the school for
Yeah.
the kid. So trying to convey that information to them, that if this kid, if we know what the problem is, we
Hmm.
can actually try and create an environment where he would be more successful and he would be more happy and he would be able to be to actually bloom. So I think trying to frame it in those aspects as to why it's important and why it's going to be helpful in the long run is the way to go. I understand that sometimes that can be quite tricky as well.
Yeah.
And there is no guarantee that someone is actually going to take your word for it, because they they have difficulty accepting it. But I think just we can only try our best.
Yeah.
So framing it in a very positive aspect as to why it's important and how it will
Yeah.
help is the way to go. And hopefully giving them some kind of information about it, trying to just have a conversation that's more informative rather than more blamey. Like, it shouldn't be blaming the kid, like, oh, this will help because he tries to blurt out in the class, he misbehaves in the class. Not trying to make that complaint, but trying to say, I've recognized this and maybe this will be helpful. So I think
Hmm.
it's all
Like
about how you put it
focusing
across.
focusing more on the positive side of it rather than focusing rather than making it sound like a problem. You can actually make it sound like something that can be changed. You can work on it, and you can really sometimes you can actually change the situation completely just by changing your own perspective and your own behavior. Like we've all watched That Is a Mean Pearl so many times. And that one movie taught you that, just your behavior towards a person can change his life completely. It's about how
Precisely.
you look at it, right? So
Yeah.
I think this is where we stop for this video, and we can, join back for part 2.